Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma daf Pechet. I just want to announce before class that our Circle of Friends 2024 list is now up on the website. Please check that your name is there, that it's spelled correctly. If you gave money for Circle of Friends and your name is not on the list, which happens sometimes money goes through a certain way that it takes a little while to process and we haven't actually received information about it. So please let us know. Sometimes just mistakes happen. And if you still want to join Circle of Friends, it is not too late. So you can join now. And if Circle of Friends is too much for you, then you can also just give a donation of any kind, which will help support Hadran's activities for the year. This is how we are able to do our daily shiurim and all the extra that goes along with it. So thank you for everyone for your support. And again, it's not too late if you haven't done it yet. We would like to now start with the end of yesterday's sugya. We basically finished up. We saw that Rabbi Elazar asked Rav the following question. When a minor gets paid for damages, if somebody damages a minor, does the money go to her father like the kesef kiddushin goes to the father, or is this different? So Rav said, no, this is different. It goes straight to the girl. And then Rish Lakish and Rabbi Lakish agree with Rav. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Okay, and then he said, afilu p'tzi'ah, even a small wound, it sounds like he's saying, to which the Gemara said at the very end of Pezayin Amubed, p'tzi'ah sakadatak, how could you say a wound? Afilu Rabbi Elazar lo kamebayale ela chabalad avchate mikaspa. The whole issue of Rabbi Elazar, his whole question, was all asked because theoretically, if the father has the rights to betroth her and get money for it, if she diminishes in value on account of it, then perhaps this money should go to him because in the end, he'll lose out from the kesef kiddushin. So that is only if it's a real injury that's going to decrease her value. But again, it's always hard to talk about these things about the value of women in marriage and all that, and forget about that. Some people say it's actually his ability to sell her as a slave. We're going to put that issue aside. We spent a long time on that in Kiddushin. But just some small wound that she gets, which certainly doesn't decrease her value, or at least we think certainly doesn't decrease her value. In a minute, we'll say it does. Well, of course, he wasn't even asking about that. So how could you even go so far as to say, Rabbi Yochanan, that would go to the father? It makes no sense. It has nothing to do with the father. To which I'm Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, but we're talking about a wound to her face where it would actually decrease her value. If she has a wound on her face, right, some sort of scar, let's say she ends up with her on her face, that could decrease her value in the marketplace or in the shidduch world, you could say, and therefore that will basically affect the father. And that's what Rabbi Yochanan was talking about. And he, again, has this unique opinion that it does go to the father, whereas Rish Lakish and Rav both thought that no, it goes to the girl herself. Now we're moving on to the next topic. So we have, I'll warn you now, it's a bit of a complicated daf. There's a lot of long-winded arguments and things that you don't really get to the end until, like, it takes a long time to get there. So I'll just warn you in advance that it's not the easiest stuff and it will be a little bit long. We'll see if I can cut it down, but we'll see. Now, if one injures a Canaanite slave, then they're liable to pay all 5 payments, including the humiliation payment, to which Rabbi Yehuda disagreed. This is a quote from our Mishnah, and Rabbi Yehuda had said, no, there isn't boshet for a slave. Now we're going to figure out why he thinks there's no boshet. Again, we're talking about Canaanite slaves. Let's just review Canaanite slaves. Canaanite slaves are people who were purchased by Jews to be slaves in their house. They undergo a brit milah. Okay, they get circumcised. They become semi-Jewish. They're not allowed to marry Jews. That's one big thing. They're not allowed. They can only marry a shifcha Canaanite, like another maidservant that's like them. And we're going to see later that their children are not attributed to them. Okay, the children of a shifcha Canaanite go after the shifcha Canaanite. Okay, and not after the father at all. Okay, so just like Gentiles, where all the yichus goes by the mother only. Now, that means it's not like in Judaism we say always it follows the mother. This is different. It's not even considered the father's child. Like we have a concept of yichus. We know who the father is. In that we don't. Okay, so that's one point we're going to talk about later. And they keep mitzvot. Okay, the only mitzvot they don't have to keep are like women. time-bound commandments because their time is not their own. They're a slave. So they can't do time-bound mitzvot. But all other mitzvot, lo taseh, negative and positive that are not time-bound, they're obligated. If you were to free them, which you're not supposed to, but if you do, they become a full-fledged Jew. They're like a convert. Okay? So that's an Eved Canaan. It's not like a regular servant working in your house or something. This is something totally different, which we no longer have anything like this anymore. My time to Rabbi Yehuda. So the question is, why did Rabbi Yehuda say they're not part of Boshet? Amar Kra. Well, the whole pasuk about Boshet comes from this Deuteronomy 25, verse 11. Ki yinatzu anashim yachdav ish v'achiv. When two men are fighting, a man and his fellow brother, this is the important word, and then the wife of one of them comes in and she grabs the genitals of one of the other man to save her husband. That's the embarrassment. And from there, we learn this payment for humiliation / embarrassment. Okay. Now, what does he say, Rabbi Yehuda? B'misha yesh lo achva. Well, it's only someone who's your brother. Now, an Eved Canaanite is not your brother. Yatsa Eved she'ein lo achva. Okay, he says, he's not your brother, and therefore he's not included in this pasuk. Rabbanan, what do the rabbis say? What do you mean? Achifu b'mitzvot. Well, he has to do mitzvot like you do. It's true, he's exempt from some of them, but he is your brother in mitzvot, and therefore he is your brother. So now we have this big debate, and this is where the sugya is going to go moving forward, which is, we're now going to bring one question against Rabbi Yehuda, who says, Ach is not your brother. What about some other verse where Ach does include Eved? I'm sorry, Ach is not Eved Canaanite. We're going to have some other verse where Eved Canaanite is included, and yet it says brother, and how are we going to deal with that? And then we're going to have two questions against the rabbis. The rabbis say, Achiv includes your brother. So, I'm sorry, I keep saying it wrong. Achiv is your brother. Achiv includes Eved Canaanite. So now we're going to ask the rabbis, after we get through the first question against Rabbi Yehuda, if Achiv means including an Eved Canaanite, then why is Eved Canaanite not part of A and B? Okay, so we're going to have three questions, two against the rabbis, one against Rabbi Yehuda, about exactly this line. Okay, so again, very simply, Achiv is equal to Eved according to the rabbis, and Achiv does not include an Eved according to Rabbi Yehuda. And again, we're only talking about Canaanite slave. Obviously, an Eved Ivri is considered your brother because he's a Jewish slave. So now they say the following. Elame'ata, first question against Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbi Yehuda, our first topic is, an eid zomeim is someone who tries to testify falsely about somebody else and tries to, let's say, kill them. And if they try to kill someone and then it turns out they lied, they get killed. That's based on a pasuk. Vasitam lo kasher zamam la'asot le'achiv. Okay, like they tried to do to their brother. So, elame'ata le Rabbi Yehuda, let's plug in. Brother does not include Eved Canaanite. So, zomeim Eved lo yaharogu. If these guys testify against a Canaanite slave and try to kill him, and then it turns out they lied, they're not going to get the death penalty. Now, it seems obvious that they do. Okay, so you say Achiv doesn't include Eved Canaanite, but it clearly does. Dirtiv, as it says, Vasitem lo kasher zamam la'asot Achiv. They're going to get the punishment they tried to do to their brother. Their brother does actually include Eved Canaanite in this case. So in order to answer this question, we're going to basically say this is an exception to the rule. And that's what we're going to have to do each time we have this kind of question. Amar Rava, Amar Rav Sheshet, Amar Kra, Ubi arta harami kirbecha mikom makom. Well, by eid zomeim, it says this in a few places in the Torah, not so many, and we will wipe out evil in your midst, which means mikom makom, any evil. In other words, this is people who passed a line that you cannot pass. They tried to get someone killed. They lied about it. It doesn't matter. We're going to include, even if they tried to kill an Eved Canaanite, we're going to kill them because we have to uproot people who are this evil from the community. Okay, second question. Now we're done with Rabbi Yehuda. We're done because all the other Achiv, we can easily say this excludes Eved Canaanite. That was the only one we couldn't say. Elame'ata l'Rabbanan. But now let's go to the rabbis. The rabbis say Achiv includes Eved. So now we're going to have two issues where this comes up. One is by a king. Eved, yehei kasher l'machut. What? An Eved could be a king then? Because what does the pasuk say? If you look in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 17, verse 15. Som tasim alecha melech, put a king upon you. Asher yivchar Hashem lokecha legabel, choose. Mikerev achecha tasim alecha melech. Put upon a king from within the midst of your brothers. So now you're going to say we could use it. We can have an Eved Canaanite be king over the Jewish people. That, of course, can't be. So they basically say, well, we're going to counter this with a separate question. A convert also is not allowed to be a king. Now, this is a whole separate sugya we don't have time for today. But a convert can't be a king. It comes up in other places, so we'll deal with it. So now, according to this, a convert, everyone agrees, is achiv. Okay, that's why it's l'divrei hakol. Even Rabbi Yehuda will say a convert is achiv. Convert is clearly your brother. They've converted. They become Jewish. We treat them as Jews, and yet they also can't be. And it says achicha in the pasuk. It should include a convert. So they explain el amar kra mikerav achecha. It doesn't just say your brother. It says from the mikerav from the inside of, or trying to see exactly how to translate it. It really just means from among your brother, but kerev they explain to mean mimuvchal shebachecha. From the best, from the elite of your brothers. Okay, the word mikerev doesn't mean elite, but they're going to darshan it to mean, right? So that's a good translation. From the midst of your brothers. From the midst of your brothers means from the best of your brothers. Okay, and then that's going to exclude, again, it doesn't mean Gerim can't be amazing, but it means we're going to choose from this certain group that was born Jewish, basically, which is going to exclude both of them. Okay, so now that was the first question. That was a little easier to answer. Both those two questions were more simple to answer. But now we have another problem. Now, according to the rabbis, if achiv includes even an eved, then an eved should be a kosher witness. And we know that an eved is not a kosher witness. We don't accept their testimony in court, just like we don't accept, and I'll already give you testimonies that we don't accept of people that we're going to get to today in today's sugya. First of all, we don't accept relatives to testify against each other. We don't accept women to be witnesses in a court, okay, except for in unique cases, which we've seen before, like for aguna cases, right? If a woman's husband dies, so we allow it. And that's a whole sugya that I don't have a really good explanation for, other than understanding it perhaps in context of their times and the way women were viewed in their society. It's a big complicated topic to view with our modern day eyes. Why weren't women accepted as witnesses? But we're going to put that topic aside. Minors can't be accepted as witnesses. Okay, that makes sense. They don't have enough knowledge, right? They're considered not bardat. People who lie and cheat and things like that, right? People who will take money, like a thief, someone who steals money, can't be a witness because they might take money to lie falsely. So that's a whole group of people. And in addition, an Eved Canaanite, now a convert, of course, can testify. So now we're going to try to figure out why, if the pasuk says, and it turns out if you find out that he's a false witness because he lied falsely about his brother, and there you see the word brother, okay, it's actually used not in the right way here because it's not about the witness, it's about who he testified about. But here they seem to say, in the world of witnesses, we see brothers as needed, and that should include Eved Canaanite according to the rabbis, and it doesn't. So we're going to have two answers for this. Both are pretty long, and I would say a little long-winded. Amar Ula, Eidut lo matzira. Okay, so Ula says you can't say aid, that they could be eidim. Why? Well, ati eidu b'kavachomer mi'isha. Because we can learn it from a simple kavachomer from a woman. Uma isha shi ruya lavo b'kahal. A woman can marry, right? Any woman can marry a Jewish man, and yet she is psula le'edut, and yet she can't testify. So an eved she'eino ha'oil lavo b'kahal, so a slave who cannot marry a Jew, eino din shepsula le'edut. If you can't marry a Jew, then obviously, right, a woman who can marry a Jew and is part of the Jewish people 100% that she can even marry Jews, and yet she can't testify, all the more so a slave should not be allowed to testify if he can't even marry Jews. To which they say that's not a good kavachomer. Because Mali, Shasha Kenina, but a woman can't do a circumcision. Maybe the fact that you're circumcised is what allows you, again, this is partly, they don't really know why women can't testify. Perhaps it's because they don't get circumcised. And that's the reason. If they were able to circumcise, they can't, but right, because they don't have a circumcision, therefore they can't testify. Whereas a Eved Canaanite does get a circumcision. So Tomar be'eved shura oil. We say, okay, let's try a katan. Katan yochiach. Here we have a minor. Sheyeshna b'milah. A boy minor had a circumcision, upasule edut, and yet can't testify. So maybe we could learn it from a kavachomer, from a minor who has a circumcision and still can't testify, all the more so an Evet Knani, who's not as much part of the Jewish people as the Katan, even though he has circumcision, right? If the circumcision doesn't help him, basically, he still shouldn't be allowed to testify. What's the problem? Well, the Evet Knani has a one-up on him, right? He has a one-up on the woman because he gets the circumcision. He has a one-up on the minor because Mala Katan she'eino b'mitzvot, Tomar b'Eved shu b'mitzvot. Minors are unobligated in mitzvot, and Evet Knani is. Again, not all, but still a lot of mitzvot. Well, Isha Tochiach. Now we're going to go back to this least common denominator. So the woman will prove that it's not, that being part of mitzvot isn't what makes you a kosher witness, because she's part of mitzvot and she's not a kosher witness. Sheyeshna b'mitzvot upasule edut, and yet she still can't testify. This is when we always cancel out. It can't be the circumcision because not having a circumcision disqualifies you because the katan has a circumcision is disqualified. It can't be the mitzvot, not having mitzvot because she had mitzvot and she's disqualified. So what's the least common denominator between the woman and the minor? They're not obligated in all mitzvot. Upsulin laha'id, and they're not qualified to testify. So therefore, from the least common denominator of the woman and the minor, that both of them are not obligated in all mitzvot, we'll say also an Eved is not obligated in all mitzvot and therefore can't testify. But what's the problem? Malatz, but there's some least common denominator between the woman and the minor that's not true for the Eved, and the Eved has a one-up on both of them. What is that? Interesting one. Malatz shekain eino ish. They're not male. Okay, maybe they're not male, grown male. Okay, the child is a male but not grown up, not called an ish, and the woman is an isha, not an ish. She's a female, not a male. So the Eved is a male who's grown. So he's got one up on both of them. Tomar be'Eved shehu ish, right? So the Eved has ish. So you can't learn from the two of them. So now we're back to square one. Well, not exactly, but elatiti migazlan. So now they try something else entirely. Let's try a thief. Let's forget the woman, the minor, and the woman, and let's try from a thief. If a thief is pasul, then why don't we say also right? Because now a thief is a man and is grown and yet can't testify. So why don't we learn from there to an Eved? There's an obvious problem here, which Gemara is going to say right now. What do you mean? He did terrible things. He stole money. And because of that, he's suspect, and that's why he can't be. You can't say the same thing for an Eved, right? Just because he's an Eved, we don't assume he's not reliable, he's cheating, he's stealing. Tomar be'Eved she'em asav garmulo. It's not his actions that cause him to be an Eved Canaanite, it's his birth that, he happened to not be born Jewish. So, ela titi migazlan u'michat mehanav. So the conclusion is, learn it from Gazlan and a woman, or Gazlan, a thief, and a minor. And from the combination of the two, you can get it because he's an ish, right? And, the woman, let's say, could do each one and what they have and what they don't have. And you come to the least common denominator. And from there, you could actually learn it. So in the end, that's how they get to the conclusion that Eved Canaanite can't, based on a kavachomer from a Gazlan who is a man and yet can't testify. So that reduces that. And the woman or the child, basically the combination of the two could teach you about an Eved Canaanite. Because again, what's with the woman and the child? They're not commanded to do all mitzvot. Okay, whereas the Gazlan is. So again, you get to the combination of the two. That was all one explanation. Okay, where were we? We had three questions on this. Does achiv include slave or not include slave? We asked one question, Rabbi Yehuda, who thought it didn't include. And then we had a question. We answered it, right, with the eidim zomeim. Then we moved to the other two topics where we questioned, what about a king for the rabbis who said achiv does include brother? There we had a special limud mikerav achecha from the Shiur brother. And then we have why he can't be an aid. We're now going to have a second explanation instead of this one, this kal v'chomer, which got very convoluted. Also, we're going to have a bit of a convoluted drasha here. Mar b'rei Ravina Mar, he's going to give a different reason. And this is based on a pasuk, Amar Kra, lo yumtu avot abanim. It's a very famous pasuk. It says in Devarim chapter 24, verse 16, lo yumtu avot abanim, ubanim lo yumtu al avot. Okay, the simple reading of this, ish b'chet o yumat, is everybody dies for their own sin. Fathers don't die for their children's sins. children don't die for their father's sins. Okay, there's a whole question about this because other psukim seem to say you do. We'll get to all this. I believe it's in Sanhedrin. Anyway, right now we're going to use this pasuk though for two other drashot. This pasuk is used, by the way, to teach that also fathers can't testify about their sons and sons can't testify about their own fathers because they're relatives. What I mentioned before about relatives. That is learned from here. And we're now going to try to learn from here that Evet Knani can't be a witness. How so? We'll see right now. So Marberei Dravinama, the pasuk says, Lo yum tu avot abanim. Okay, now, how does he darshan this? Lo yum tu al pi avot she'en lahem chayis banim. I mentioned this before on purpose because it was going to come up here, which is that sons of avadim knanim are not considered their sons. They're not miyuchas achareihem. Okay, when we have children, our children are considered our children. If we convert, so converting is a little different. If you convert, you're like a newborn baby, and therefore your father is no longer considered your father. But from here on in, you have children, your children will be your children. But in Evet Knani, it's not like that. So now they say the following. What does it mean, Lo yum tu avot al banim? How does the drasha go? Lo yum tu al pi avot. No one can die based on testimony of a father that doesn't have sons connected to him, meaning they're not considered his own. Now, how do we get from this to that? Why don't we just read this the simple way? Well, if you thought it meant the way this is going to be darshan in Sanhedrin to teach, you can't testify about a relative. Lo yum tu avot abanim be'edut banim. A father won't die based on the testimony of his own son because a son can't testify about his own father because they're relatives. Lichter rachmana lo yum tu avot al b'neihem. And the Torah, the pasuk should have said, fathers shouldn't die on account of their sons, their own sons, b'neihem. Doesn't say their own sons. So from here, we're going to learn the fact that it didn't use that language. We're going to learn the avot al banim, avot that don't have banim. You can only die al pi, people that have yichus to their sons. So my banim, shma mina de lo yum tu al pi avot she'en lem chayis banim. And that's what we learn the Evet Knan. But we're going to have a bunch of questions on this. And again, we are going to stick with this. Elameata. Ubanim lo yum tu al avot. Well, what about the second part then? If you're going to darshan the second part the same way you darshan the first part, the second part of that pasuk is the reverse order. Sons won't die for their fathers. So then what would you come to the conclusion? Hachanami lo yum tu al pi badim she'en lem chayis avot. You can't die from children that have no fathers that connect to them. What would that be? That would be a ger, a convert, because their fathers don't connect to them anymore. So, elager hachinami de pasul eidut, you're going to say a convert can't testify. That's just not true. Amre, so they say hachi hashta. What you're comparing ger and Evet Knani? No. Ger nehidein lo chayis lamala lamata yesh lo chayis. Well, it's true they won't connect to their parents before them after they convert, but even if their parents convert with them, they're not going to be connected to them through yichus. But lafuke Evet dein lo chayis lo lamala v'lo lamata. But a ger will have yichus going forward, whereas an Evet has no yichus backwards and no yichus forwards. Di'isak data ger pasul eidut. If you wanted the pasuk to teach you that a ger can't testify, lichta rachmana, the pasuk should have read, lo yum tu avot al b'neihem. Okay, now, if it had read it like this, fathers won't die on behalf of their sons, then you would have had that l'chadam rina, lo yamutu be'edut banim. You would have had, now, if you wanted it just to teach you converts and slaves, if you wanted to teach you converts, no, and also slaves, no, it would have been much more simple to do like this. And you also wanted to teach you relatives, right? So the first part of the pasuk would be the relative part. Lo yum tu avot al b'neihem, on their sons, meaning sons can't testify for fathers because they're relatives. And then you would learn all relatives. Then the second part would be, next rachmanu ubanim lo yum tu al avot. And then you wouldn't say avotehem, because that would be relatives. We learned that from the first part. Then you would say sons not from their fathers, which would teach you, Jeshmat minat trey. You would learn two things. Chada, from the first part, you would learn lo yum tu banim be'edut avot. And the second part would teach you, idach lo yum tu al pi banim she'en lem chayis avot. You can't be killed based on testimony of a child who doesn't go back to his father. That would be a convert. And then, how would you get Eved? Well, that would be an obvious kavachomer. Once a ger who doesn't have chayis in one direction can't be a convert, can't be a witness. Eved nafgalei b'kavachomer migir. Uma ger de lamala who the ein lo yichus, a ger just doesn't have yichus going backwards. Aval lamata, but come from here on in, yesh lo yichus, and yet he's pasul le'edut. Evet she'en lo chayes lo lamala v'lo lamata, einu din she'eh pasul le'edut. So you would obviously then get to an evet, and you wouldn't need, so you could do each phrase of the pasuk teaching you something different, and then you'd learn everything. The fact that it didn't do that, and it didn't say b'neihem to teach you in a much more clear way the relatives. But it actually, because it said banim, it taught you this issue of your son's not connecting to you. From there we derive shma mina eved she'en lo chayes lo lamala v'lo lamata hu de pasul le'edut aval ger kevan de'esh lo chayes lamata kasher le'edut. This is basically just proving what we know. From there, the fact that the first part of the phrase already teaches it, and that's in the direction of people who don't connect to their sons, teaches you just the eved is on the outs, but a ger would be on the in. A ger obviously can testify. Now, they're going to have one last question here. If that's the case, then let's do what we just did in the reverse order. What did we just try to say? Why don't you teach relatives in a more clear manner, right? To avot al bneihem. And then the second part would have been the ger. Now, if we're saying the first part is for the eved, because it's specifically talking about those who don't have sons connected to them, which would exclude the ger, then the second part of that pasuk should have said, it should have said, ubanim lo yimtu al avotehem. Sons can't die on behalf of their fathers. And then that should have taught you much more clearly the relative issue, because their own fathers, which would teach you relative much more clearly. So why does it just say, sons shouldn't die for fathers in general without saying their own fathers, which teaches relatives? Which really sounds like converts, that don't connect to their fathers. So there they just answer, I did katav lo yum tu avot abanim, katav nam yubanim lo yum tu alafot. It's just to make the language parallel. There's no real reason, okay? So again, they're darshaning, which is funny because they did it the other way, right, to prove the point. This way they just say, oh, it's just to match the first language. So again, what they're trying to say is they specifically started the pasuk with lo yum tu avot al banim, which means, since it didn't say b'neihem, their own fathers, what they're basically saying is fathers don't get killed. No one can get killed by testimony of someone where you have a father whose children don't follow their genealogy, which is an eved Canaan. And that's the main thing they're learning from this pasuk. It got very convoluted because they tried to raise all different possibilities. Why, and how do we prove it? And what about a ger? And then we resolve it. So both in this sugya and in the issue with the king, we also went back to the convert, because convert also, right, is we have to figure out, is this including, excluding a convert? There, the convert was excluded as well. In this case, the convert is different than the eved. Okay, that was long. That was all just part of where we started our daf, even though we started with something else about the ptziah. But once we got past that, we basically said the eved Canaanite is a machloket. Do you pay boshet? Do you not pay boshet? What's it based on? Does a chiv include eved Canaanite? Does not include eved Canaanite? And then we just had to figure out, why are there exceptions to this rule? And basically we came up with the exceptions to the rule, one exception according to Rabbi Yehuda and two exceptions according to the rabbis. Now we're on a totally different topic, also a bit of a long-winded sugya. And really what we're focusing on the Mishnah is the part about the woman. If you remember, if a woman injures, she doesn't pay because she doesn't have money to pay. Only once her husband dies and she gets her property back, then she has money and she can pay the damages. So we need a little bit of background, things we learned in Seder Nashim. We're going to talk about Nichsei Malog. Tomorrow we'll get to Nichsei Tzon Barzel. But right now, let's stick with Nichsei Malog. Nichsei Malog is property. I always think of it as heirlooms and things like that, where the woman brings them into the marriage and she gets them when the marriage is over. They come out with her while she is married, and they come out as is. Okay, if they depreciated in value, increased in value, it doesn't matter. She gets them as they are right now, okay, at the end of the marriage. So she gets them in the event of divorce, she gets them in the event of death of the husband. But while she's married, the husband uses them and gets all the benefits from them. So it's a field, let's say she has a field she inherited. So the husband gets all the produce from the field while they're married. This is called kinyan perot. He has rights to the perot. She holds the kinyan aguf. She owns the property. But the question is, to what extent does she own the property while they're married? Now, in the event of death, if she dies, if he dies, she gets her land back. Let's say it's land, whatever it is. If she dies first, then he inherits her. Okay, he gets it. It goes to him. Now, we had a woman here, Ime de Rav Shmuel bar Abba. She was the mother of Rav Shmuel bar Abba. It's going to get a little confusing because his father's Abba, and she's going to marry another guy named Abba. Okay, so she was married to Abba number one, and now she's married to a different guy named Rabbi Abba. So she was the mother of Rav Shmuel bar Abba from Hadran, and Hamanasiba Leila Rabbi Abba. And she was married to a different Rabbi Abba. Now she gets married. She brings this son with her into the marriage. Kitavtinu l'nichse l'Rav Shmuel bar Abba bara. And she decides that I don't want my husband to inherit my nichse malog. I want it to go, perhaps it was money she had from the ketubah from her first husband. I want it to go to my son. So she writes a document that says my money is going to my son. Now, right now, the money is the husband's. But in the event that I die before he does, right? If he dies first, obviously she'll get it and then she could give it to her son. But if I die first, I don't want my husband to inherit it. I want it to go to my son from my first marriage. So, Batar Deshchiva, the whole question of today's daf, the rest of today's daf is going to be, can she do this? Does she have the rights to sell something? It's not really hers right now because the husband has all the rights to it right now. On the other hand, she owns the goof. Like the simple reading would be, of course, she can sell rights that will come into existence at some future point because she does own. They are hers. It's just she has no access to them right now, so to speak, because he gets all the proceeds. So Batai Deshchiva, she happened to die first. And after she died, turning out a bet, Aza Rav Shmuel bar Abba came to Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba. He goes to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. I did not have a chance to check if Rav Shmuel bar Abba, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba are related. I don't know. Another son of Abba. Anyway, probably they weren't related. Anyway, I don't know. But he goes to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. And Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says to him, yeah, you're the rightful owner of this property. What she did was a legitimate thing to do. Also Rabbi Abba. So Rabbi Abba, the husband, was not very happy about this. He wanted the money for himself. Amar Lemilta Kamei to Rav Hoshaya. So he tells this to Rav Hoshaya. Rav Hoshaya didn't really know. So Azar Rav Hoshaya, Amar Kamei to Rav Yehuda. He goes and tells it to Rav Yehuda. Amar Le, and Rav Yehuda says, Hachi Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said the following thing. Hayisha shemachra b'nichsei malug b'chayei ba'ala v'meta. If a woman sells her nichsei malug while her husband is still alive and she dies, now selling it is really no different than gifting it, which is what she did here, and then she dies, habal motzi miyada lekuchot. The exact opposite of Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. He said the husband can take it out of the hands of those who purchased it. And we don't yet know why, but that's what, and we're going to spend the whole daf figuring out why Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba said it goes to the son, and why Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel that it goes to the father. The father can say, this was a totally meaningless act that she did. She had no right to sell it because it wasn't hers at the time. So let's see what happens now. So basically, the father, you can imagine the scene, right? The son says, it's mine, and the father says, no, it's not. So, not the father, the husband. And the husband says, no, it's mine. So, Amra kameh to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. So they now go and bring what Shmuel said to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. Now, Shmuel was obviously more prominent than Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. So they say, what do you have to say to what Shmuel said? Amar lehu ana matnita yadnani. He says, look, I'm basing it on a Mishnah. And here goes. Now, it's going to take a little while to understand all this. So be patient. But we're going to read this Mishnah from Bava Batra. Okay, Bava Batra, there's a whole section of Bava Batra that's all about inheritance law. So we're going to get into this right now. Hakotev nechasav libino la'achar moto. A person in his lifetime says, I'm giving my son all of my property when I die. Okay, so now, the son, this is going to be a very similar situation, and that's going to be the debate. Is it really similar or is it not? Okay, if we can say this is similar, which is what Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba is doing, then we have an answer, because this person basically said, I'm giving you this property. It's going to be yours. Really, he says, me'achshav u'la'achar mita. What does that mean, me'achshav u'la'achar mita? It's yours now, meaning you own this land, but until I die, I'm going to get all the benefits from it. So everything that grows in this field will be mine. Okay, that's exactly the same relationship as this woman and her husband. Right? The husband has the payroll, the woman has the goof. It belongs to her. Okay, the only difference is that in in the case of the woman, it was hers first. In the case of the son, he's getting it after, but it doesn't make a difference because right now at the present, the father basically gave the son the rights to the land itself, but just said, you're only going to have access to it when I die. So haben, okay, so first we have a few unrelated to our case topics, but so the son right now can't sell this land because it's in the father's domain. The father's getting payroll. So he has to wait till the father dies if he wants to sell the land. And the father can't sell it because what's he going to sell, right? It's owned by the son. So he can't sell this land because it won't be a valid sale because when he dies, it'll go back to the son. However, what if they did sell? Well, each one could sell the rights to what they have, basically. We've seen cases like this. If the father does sell it, what he's basically selling is the proceeds until his death. Once he dies, it goes to the son entirely. So he could sell the proceeds, let's say the guy's old. So, he probably will die in a few years. So he'll sell it for a little bit of money. He'll get some money for the proceeds for the next few years. If he's young, maybe he can sell it for a lot of money because, he's got, hopefully, who knows, but it's a bit of a risk for whoever's buying it, but they're buying the proceeds for whatever number of years this person will live. Machar haben, now here comes the key. If the son sells it, that's exactly what we're looking for. The son right now can't really sell it, but what if he does? Can he sell rights to the property on the death of the father? Because at the death of the father, it will become his. So machar haben ein lelokach ad she'yamut ha'av. Okay, in other words, the lokach basically gets nothing until the father dies, but he does get the land when the father dies. Now notice it doesn't distinguish between if the father dies before the son or the son dies before the father. So comes Rabbi Yehuda Abba and says, Ki ma'it av mia itle lelokach. Okay, when the father dies, the lokach does get something. Okay, when the father dies, whoever the son sold it to, he basically sold rights to the land in the event that the father dies or when the father dies. So now the father dies. It theoretically should have gone to the son, but the son already sold his rights to it. So it goes to this guy. Afagav, and comes Rabbi Yehuda says, even though even if it never actually went into the son's hands. In other words, theoretically, we're going to see this in Machlokes Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan about whether the son has to die, the son has to be alive when the father dies for this to happen, because there has to be that moment where it switches ownership from the father to the son. And if that never happens because the son's already dead, then it won't work. That Rabbi Yochanan's going to say. But Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold by that. He says, what do you mean? The son has rights presently to the goof, okay? He has rights to the body because the father gave it to him now. It's true, he said, you can't use it till I die, but he has rights to the land. So, the principle of the land. So now we're going to say that the fact that Rabbi Yehuda says it goes both ways, we still don't see how this connects 100% yet, although we can get an idea. It's the same thing of the woman, basically selling her rights to this land, right, that she doesn't have access to, and she's going to die, so she won't have access to it, but she's selling it to her son. She can do that even though she doesn't have access to it right now. Ki Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Now, he understands this like Rish Lakish, Da'amal, who said, Lo shna met haben b'chei ha'av de lo atu lidei haben, lo shna met ha'av b'chei haben de lo atu lidei haben. Kana lokach. In other words, Rish Lakish said, we can read this Mishnah since the Mishnah didn't specify that the father had to die before the son, didn't say anything about it. We can assume it works both ways. If the father dies before the son, obviously, it becomes the son's for a second, and then he's basically he's already sold his rights, so that works. Even if the son died first and never actually got access to this land, still he can sell the rights to it. And when the father dies, it goes. De'itmar. Now we're going to see the machlokes Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Then we're going to understand how Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba and understands the machlokes between them and how he understands Rish Lakish's position, which is the one he's basically using for telling this child the land is yours, or whatever it is yours, the money. De'itmar, as it is said. Now here comes the machlokes Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. So it's a little repetitive because we kind of said this already. But then we're going to say how Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba understands the machlokes. This is the case that we're fighting about. If the son sold it in the father's lifetime and then the son died first, when the father dies, because remember, the son only sold it for the death of the father. Rabbi Yochanan amar lo kana lokach. Rabbi Yochanan said this is not a valid sale because it was never given to the child. And Rish Lakish amar kana lokach. He says it works, as we just said. So now we're going to explain better. Rabbi Yochanan, again, this is Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba's explanation. Rabbi Yochanan amar lo kana lokach. Why? Amar lecha ki katani matnitin machar ben lo kana lokach ad sheyamut ha'av. V'chimayit ha'av it le lokach. That's when the Mishnah says, if the son sold, then the lokach gets it when the father dies. If the father died, then the son gets it. It's only de lo met haben b'chayei ha'av. This is just repetitive. It's saying what we already saw, which is only if the son didn't die first. Da'atu li ben, because then the land, right, it didn't go to the son. Sorry, it did go to the son. If the son doesn't die, then the land will go to the son at some point in time, right? We'll have the land is all owned by the father dies, the land goes to the son. But if it was never in the hands of the son, even if the father dies, the lokach can't get it because the son never had it. Why is that? Now you have to explain why that is. What do you mean? The father said, this is yours from now until I die. I'm just going to keep the proceeds. Wasn't he giving the body of the land to the son presently? So you'd have to say that Rabbi Yochanan holds alma kasaval kinyan perot ki kinyan aguftam. This is a big line. The way Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba understands Rabbi Yochanan is that owning the proceeds is basically like owning the body of the land. So while they're in ownership of the perot, they can't have access. The other person doesn't have access to the land. The one who has proceeds, it's as if they own the land, because they have proceeds, so it's like having the land. And therefore, when the son sold it, it wasn't his to sell. So only if the father dies and then kicks in, then the kinyan, perot, and guf all go to the son, then he has the rights to sell it to somebody else. So then even if he sold it earlier, the sale will take place because at some point it becomes the son's for a moment, and then the sale is effective. But if the son is dead already and never had access to it, then it wouldn't work. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan's opinion isn't really going to interest us so much because both opinions in the end are going to hold like Rish Lakish. Okay, that's why this is very complicated because we're getting into a lot of things that we don't necessarily really need. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish amar kana lokach. And now we're going to go to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, which is interesting. So here Rabbi Yirmiyah explains Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish's position. Why does he get it, even if the son died? Because when the Mishnah said, if the son gets it, sells it, it's going to be the purchasers, even when, right? When the father dies. In other words, he's not going to get it until the father dies, but that implies that as soon as the father dies, he will get it. And again, this we already said, that Rish Lakish said, look, it didn't say only if the son dies later, right? So therefore, it doesn't matter if it was ever in the hands of the son. Either which way, the son has rights to sell, and this is the opposite of what we just said, right? It's going to be kana lokach alma kasavar kinyan perot lav ke kinyan agufdami. Now, this is the key to understand. He says, owning perot, which is what the father has right now, the proceeds, does not mean you own the body of the land. Just like in the woman's case, the woman brought nichse malog into the marriage. The husband was getting the proceeds, but she still owned the land. So of course she could give it to her son. Okay, that's simple, very simple now. Even though we got very complicated, it's very straightforward. If you don't own the body of the land, you don't own it. You only have proceeds, you only have proceeds. It's the simple way to read it, really. And therefore what he sold was his rights. His rights will kick in, just like she sold her rights. They'll kick in and all is, valid sale. Va'anan, now the Gemara is just going to tell you that Hashta bein Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba bein Rabbi Yehuda ke Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish sfira. Okay, both of them hold like Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, and this is because the Gemara, their paskins like Rish Lakish. Nobody's going to hold like Rabbi Yochanan. So now we have to explain why there's a machloket within Rish Lakish, because it seems pretty clear. If kinyan perot is lav kinyan aguf, which is the way we understood Rish Lakish, then it should work in the woman case as well. So now they're just going to review about Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. Ka'am Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. Isal kadata kinyan perot ke kinyan agufdami. If you wanted to say that kinyan perot was kinyan aguf, like the way I explained Rabbi Yochanan, okay, we're going to now reject this. Ki mayit av umayit haben b'chaya av amai ilay lilokach. Ki kazabin hai lav didei kazabin. This halacha wouldn't be true, what Rish Lakish said, if you held that kinyan perot is kikinyan aguf, because basically the son would be selling something that wasn't his. So Ella lav shma minai says you must conclude from this Mishnah, and this is here's whole proof, that kinyan perot lav kikinyan aguf. The kinyan of the perot is not kikinyan aguf, and that's why he was able to sell his share and it's effective, and that's right, the son, when he got it from the father, and that's why the woman could give her share to the son. Now, they brought it back. Adrua kameh de Rabbi Yehuda. So now they were having a back and forth, right? They throwed Rabbi Yehuda's psak of Shmuel, and then comes Rabbi Yirmiyah responds, and now Rabbi Yehuda has to respond to him. So Amar lehu hachi amar Shmuel zo eno domeh lemishnatenu. He answers very simply and says, that's not like our Mishnah. The case of the woman is different from the Mishnah. And as I agree with you, how you read the Mishnah like Rish Lakish, but those two cases are different. And what he really disagrees with him is about how he understood the kinyan perot. Rish Lakish just said it doesn't matter father, son, whether the son died first or not, which brought Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba to conclude this conclusion of kinyan perot is lav kinyan aguf. Basically, Shmuel says it's not the same. Now, we don't know why. So we're going to have two different explanations. The first is my time. Rav Yosef comes to explain what happened here, what Shmuel meant here. Why is it not the same? So again, we're going to have very complicated ways of proving things, like most of this stuff today. Bishlama itana ifla. Okay, we had a lot of this today. If it would have said something else, then if it would have flipped it, the Mishnah, that the son bequeathed his stuff to the father, then I'd agree with you. If the son bequeathed it to the father, and the father then sold his rights in his lifetime, then it wouldn't matter who died first, it would be valid. But elahashta de katane hakotev nechasav lebino mishum dero'oli arshohu. The reason why they chose this case is because this case is unique. Why is this case unique? Because it's a father giving to a son. Anyway, it was going to go to the son. That's what gives the son the rights to sell it, only because he's anyway going to inherit it. In other words, the son to the father's stuff has a very close connection, more than anybody else. But the son to this mother, he doesn't inherit from the mother. So he doesn't have that connection. He can't sell the payroll. That's what he says. But Abai doesn't like this. Abai says that can't be Shmuel's explanation. Amalei Abai, atu bra yarit Abba, Abba lo yarit bra, but a father also can inherit from a son. If a son has no heirs, he can also inherit. So he also has that connection. So what made you say no for a father's son? Well, what do you think the son was doing when he said, I want my father to get it? He was just trying to get the money away from his sons. He wanted to say, I don't want my son to inherit, I want my father to inherit. You could say the exact same thing for a father and son. Why would the father give all, if anyway the son's going to inherit, why did he give it all to the son in his lifetime? Because he wanted to prevent the other brothers from getting it. So either which way, we're doing something different here, and that doesn't prove anything. So now he's going to give a different reason, and with this, we'll finish for today. Mishum takanat usha. The reason why it's not domeh is not because, now here I'm just going to give it in a conceptual framework. We're not going to say this Mishnah is unique because it's inheritance law, and that gives the son more clout. It's actually that the woman to her son is a unique halacha. In other words, normally we would say, I would agree with you, kinyan perot is not kinyan aguf, and anyone can sell the rights to the guf of the karka and it will go into effect. But this woman can't give it to her son for a unique reason. What's that? Well, mishum takanat usha, because there was a takana in usha that didn't allow for this. What is this takana of usha? And we'll talk about this more tomorrow, but I'll just finish here. Ta'am Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, be'usha hitkinu ha'isha shemachran nechsei malug b'chayei ba'ala v'meita haba motzi miyada lekuchot. The woman's nichsei malug was supposed to be inherited by the husband. So much so that the rabbi said they wanted to prevent women from selling them to other people. And they said if she sells them in her lifetime and then she dies, the husband, and she dies before the husband can take it away from the people that she bought it. And that's why this father can take it away from the son. It's because of a special takana. That's why it's not domeh l'mishnatin. Okay, so that's the end of our sugya for today. Tomorrow we'll see. They try to prove this reading, but then they don't really prove it well. They reject the proof. But anyway, we're now going to just do a quick review of the daf. I know it's late. So we started with, we had, is it achiv, is it not achiv? And then we had to deal with 3 other cases where Achiv comes and seems to contradict either Rabbi Yehuda or the rabbis, and we resolved that. With that, we got into how do we know an Eved Canaanite? We had 2 different explanations of how an Eved Canaanite can't be a kosher witness. Then we moved to the story where we had a debate about whether the woman could actually give the goof of the karka while she wasn't having ownership rights to it, right? Could she pass it on to her son? Which seemed, Rabbi Yehuda tried to prove from this Mishnah in Bava Batra that she could, just like the father could give it to the son and then the son could sell it, okay? He had rights to sell it. That's just like the woman having rights to give it to her son. But the other side said it's not the same. Why is it not the same? We had 2 different explanations. The first one got rejected. The second one was because of this Usha Takana, which basically didn't allow the women to do this. Okay, Rabbi Yomi Abba, why he didn't hold by this Usha Takana is a good question. Anyway, we'll deal with this more tomorrow. And that's it for today. Wishing everybody a good day. And reminder about Circle of Friends. Wishing everybody a good day. We'll see you tomorrow.